Let's get centered. This week, CBS News turns right with Paramount's installation of a controversial anti-woke blogger as editor-in-chief. And federal law enforcement intensifies its clash with America's blue cities. Plus, Donald Trump announces a Gaza ceasefire. Will it hold? I'm Louis Miranda alongside Carl Meacham and Jeremy Murphy. We've had some amazing guests in the last few weeks, so this week we're going to take a step back to digest some of that and to update on some hot topics. I've got to say, Cornell Belcher's comments a couple of weeks ago about the need for Democrats to fight this battle on healthcare for the shutdown has played out favorably for Democrats. It seems he was right. Congresswoman Berrigan had doubled down on that last week, noting that it's the fight that people want. And of course, shutdowns have impacts. We're starting to see issues with air traffic controllers affect airports. So the pressure is definitely building, but the healthcare message is working. And public opinion shows that, more Americans continue to acknowledge that the president and the Republican majorities in Congress are at fault. And unexpectedly, Marjorie Taylor Greene, the ultra-conservative congresswoman from Georgia, has been one of the biggest surprises who has put Republican congressional leaders and President Trump in a tough spot because she doesn't want to see her constituents' healthcare prices go up either. So it looks like it's working out well.
Yeah, it does. It definitely does. The shutdown, it's just not about a spending fight. It's not about a spending fight. It's about healthcare. And it's people that are not getting their paychecks. So, this is affecting people, going beyond the healthcare fight. Active duty military personnel are set to miss their next paycheck by October 15th. So you're starting to see that the spillover that the shutdown has isn't just the healthcare stuff, but it's also it's going into other areas. And this is definitely turning up the heat on the Republicans. And a lot of folks are asking, who can this be attributed to? Is it more the Republicans? Is it more the Democrats? It's clearly in the hands of the Republicans now. And you're I think Democrats need to draw the line. They cannot falter on this, because I do think that there's a critical mass of people, and it's not just Democrats that are supportive of the approach they're taking.
My issue is, I have many issues, but the glee, they're bragging about firing people. And, the people who are furloughed might not get their money. And he's using that. Like, these are hardworking people who are apolitical. They just want to go to work, whether it's a secretary or an assistant or whatever. And here you have the White House bragging about how they're cutting government. And it's just like, and there's this almost glee. It's so cruel.
Yeah.
It's creepy. And Jeremy, you're right. And the crazy thing is that they can't not pay people back, because after Trump's disastrous last shutdown during his first term, that one went 35 days. Congress got together and passed a bill to ensure that people would get back pay in these scenarios because of the disruption that it causes. And so he signed that bill into law. And people have to get paid for this time that the government has been shut down. So it's just ridiculous. The whole thing is a pretty strange exercise on the part of Republicans. The other thing that's playing out is that the House continues to use it as an excuse to stay out of session so that they don't have to swear in the newest Democratic member who won a special election in Arizona. This is the daughter of former Congressman Raul Grijalva, who passed away a few months ago, and the special election to replace him happened more than 15 days ago, and she's not been sworn in yet because the House keeps using excuses. Even during a pro forma session, they refused to recognize Congressman Jim McGovern to swear her in. And so we saw a really interesting scene play out this week with Senator Ruben Gallego and others coming to the House side and challenging Speaker Mike Johnson right after one of his press gaggles. Carl, you were in Congress for a long, long time. Did you ever see anything like this where senators went over to the House side to challenge the Speaker?
Never. And this is definitely indicative of the environment that we're in. There was that which occurred, but then there was also this shouting match between Hakeem Jeffries and Mike Lawler.
Yeah.
They're both New York representatives, right? One is the minority leader, and you can feel the institutional rot when members are treating each other that way. Voters, Republican or Democrat, should be disgusted. I'm sorry, by this kind of outburst. It definitely reflects. It reflects a lot of frustration, but there's decorum has totally gone out the window.
Yeah, there's no comedy. There's no
No.
sense of unified sense of purpose. It's really scary. I remember I had done some work for Congressman Jim Davis many years ago from the Tampa area, and he used to tell me, well, he used to tell everybody who would listen about how when he first got to Congress, Dick Gephardt would pulled him aside and said, "Never forget that Congress is a substitute for violence." That's what these elected officials are all about, is about resolving differences through a democratic process where people get to vote, where you get to debate differences of opinion.
Yeah.
But that's the alternative. That is what they are there to do, is to enable our government to function. And when you see the tensions and the fact that every side has to play to a base that wants them to pick a fight, it definitely does not bode well. I think Hakeem Jeffries had to stand up for himself, but I agree with you, Carl, on the broader point that it's a troubling sense of where we are as a country.
Yeah, but there's a whole issue. I mean, going back to our experience in Congress, there was a willingness to compromise. That was something that every member had. And you knew if you're in the majority, sure, you'll get most of the agreement, but you're going to give something to the other side so they can also say that they were able to benefit from the process, and they live to fight another day. Right now it's winner takes all, and in a democracy, in a legislative process, that's just not sustainable.
Yeah. No, I think that's right. And there's so many factors that have contributed to that lack. Well, part of it is that the parties are weak. Parties are not able to control their members.
Yep.
Members speak to their grassroots fundraising base that gets excited when they pick fights, and that's what keeps them in office. So that's a really fascinating piece. And of course, so much what we've talked about over the last few weeks has been just either the dismantling or just the erosion of institutions. And we don't mean like the Smithsonian, though it's certainly a great institution, but the very fabric of what this democracy is built on and improved upon over the last 250 years is really being threatened and undermined in a way that's really dangerous. James Comey this week pleaded not guilty to a pretty clearly politically motivated prosecution. Trump himself had posted a message to the Attorney General on social media asking her why she wasn't moving forward on this political targeting of his opponents. That same Attorney General, Pam Bondi, went before the Senate in what was supposed to be an oversight hearing, but she went full MAGA. She was just trashing senators over entirely unrelated topics, refusing to even feign any respect for the oversight responsibility that Congress has. Carl, I ask you again, have you ever seen anything like what we saw from Pam Bondi's performance in the Senate this week?
No. And again, I think there was an exchange with Senator Durbin, and she refused to answer questions. I mean, you could hold her in contempt. Nobody did that, which
Well,
is
you
another
would
issue.
need the majority to do that, though.
Yeah, but you can make the motion, and they didn't do that.
That's a good point.
They didn't do that, which again, you want to use the process, but at the same time, it just seems that the process is just so stuck, and nobody's agreeing to the rules of the game anymore. And at the end of the day, if you would have turned the channel to Fox and shown what Bondi was doing, right? The average Fox viewer is like, yeah, she's giving it to the Democrats, she's going tough on the Democrats. And the whole thing is just turned into basically a sports game.
It's
Your
usually
team against my team. That's it.
it's Ultimate Fighting Champion, UFC style politics.
I mean,
We're in the era of
isn't the
UFC
president,
politics.
isn't he scheduling having one of these fights in the White House?
Yeah, I did hear that.
Yeah,
In his new 900,000 square foot ballroom.
that's right.
Yeah.
They're
Uh,
coming.
it's pretty crazy.
Yeah.
So yeah, there was also this week, Congress failed to pass a bipartisan Senate resolution to restrain Trump's ability to wage war against alleged Venezuelan drug traffickers. So the Article 1 branch is really defanged right now in a way that the founders, I don't want to say anticipated, but they certainly warned about the problem of parties, and how they could undermine the checks and balance system that had been created. And that's what seems to be happening right now. Of course, at the same time, we saw the Colombian president now claim that one of the boats that has been blown up by the US military in this anti-narcotics operation in the Caribbean was Colombian, and that there were Colombian citizens on board. Carl, I know that
Yeah.
you track the region closely. I'm not sure his claim has a lot of credibility, especially after the ridiculous stunt that he pulled at the UN General Assembly, or at least on the streets of New York afterwards. But how are you seeing that situation?
Yeah, well, I think you're right. It lacks credibility. Nevertheless, because I mean, you're falling into the same situation that you have even with the U.S. government, right? We have these boats being taken out in the Caribbean, but we don't have proof of the statements that are being made. So they're attributing these boats. They're saying that these boats are being taken out because they're narco boats, because they're up to no good. And who would be against that, right? Um, Nevertheless, we have processes in this country, right? We have the rule of law, we have due process. The problem, though, is that most people would look at that and say that that's being, how would you say, supportive of drug traffickers. This is what the president is been so able in trying to frame the Democrats as being soft on narco traffickers, right? And this the Senate ducked its constitutional duty, I think, in this vote. The resolution, as you've stated, to restrain strikes on these narco trafficking boats near Venezuela failed. I think it hands the executive an open-ended license for more of the same kind of action. Article 1 isn't a suggestion, as you and I and Jeremy believe. It's the guardrail that keeps the war powers in Congress's hands. So without that check, you invite mission creep and international incidents, and especially when the president is already framing foreign operations through a domestic political lens. It's not about defending Venezuela, is how a lot of folks would look at it. It's about defending the Constitution. This is a constitutional issue that I think is being brought about because of the behavior of this administration in the Caribbean. Yeah.
And Carl, you said who would be against this, meaning the bombing of the blowing up of ships in the Caribbean that are carrying drugs. Well, one person is Rand Paul, the Republican senator, who is himself one of the key critics of this administration policy. He pointed out he's been very firm in pushing back and saying, look, the Coast Guard itself has found about a 25% error rate when they go after boats
Yeah.
that they think are carrying narcotics and they board them. They have found that in about 25% of the cases, they were mistaken. There was nothing illegal happening on that ship,
Oh.
and they let it go. And so when you're talking about a 25% error rate and you're just dropping missiles randomly on fast boats in the Caribbean, there's a lot of potential for error there that is well beyond what should be acceptable, particularly because, as critics of this policy point out, we have law enforcement methods of combating international narcotics.
Yeah. But the issue is this, and this is where Donald Trump is a master. Trump is actually making the Dems look like they're protecting drug cartels. And the due process argument is completely lost on regular Americans. The details that you provided, which are the right ones, Luis, are not what Americans view when they
But
look at
again, it's
their.
coming from Rand Paul, a Republican. I'm not
No,
talking about
I know,
Democrats.
but and the questions are the right ones. I mean, we're not even getting into sort of the meat of it, right? What is the evidence that that the boat was affiliated with a designated terrorist organization? We don't have that. How were the identified folks aboard the boat? How are we certain that these folks are of the Cartel de los Soles, for instance? We don't have that. And what criteria is used to determine which vessels are struck? I mean, there are serious questions that we don't have answers to, and these actions take place. Again, regular Americans are going to look at this and say, "Of course, we're for going after the bad guys." They don't have time to look at these details, but
I don't know that I
they
don't
don't.
know how much this it's interesting you say that because I think in general I don't think they much care. And that's sort of the reality is that a lot of the public is not even paying attention to this issue.
Yeah. So
Um,
we're coming at it at the same place. It's
yeah,
just that there is a responsibility that the Congress has, and there is an interplay that used to happen in the before times uh, between the executive branch and Congress when an action like this would take place,
sure. This
and
is
that's not
exactly what
happening.
you would have been working on at the Senate Foreign Relations
Sure.
Committee, Carl.
we would we would have been notified, and then there would have been all kinds of briefings, and we would have brought in the relevant folks to explain to us how this process happened, why it happened, and if we were actually successful.
hmm And I'm not sure any of that follow up is taking place.
Not to my knowledge.
And we mentioned the Colombian president coming out and claiming that there were Colombians aboard one of those boats, or maybe it was a Colombian boat, and not having a lot of credibility after what he said at the United Nations.
Yeah.
But I think it's also interesting that the response from the Trump administration was to point out that Colombia is going to continue to be an important strategic partner. And that was fascinating.
Yeah.
Maybe cooler heads are prevailing and saying, look, we don't need to push Petro, whose visa to come to the United States was revoked after the UN General Assembly. We don't need to push him any closer to Venezuela than he already is.
That's right. And we also, it's a pragmatic move. We also need some reliable actors in the area because we can't do this alone. And if the United States is going to up their actions in Venezuela, we do need to have, operational support. We do need to have, allies, friends in the area that we can work with to reach our objectives. And I think, Petra, let's not forget, after the United States, the most, how would you say, prepared, the strongest, and uh, I think the most equipped military in the hemisphere is Colombia.
And it's a country that's a hugely important strategic partner on a bunch of fronts. They're
Sure.
working to dismantle things like the Clan del Golfo, which is like
Mhm.
a grouping of different criminal elements that control a lot of the flow of drugs and people
Yeah.
from Colombia into the Darien. They're a strategic partner economically. So, and because they have a leftist president, there's been concern throughout about his potential closeness to the Maduro regime in Venezuela. So it would be a strategic mistake for the United States to continue to push him any further away.
Yeah. Well, he's been all over the place. I mean, Petro is not consistent, even with folks that are on the same ideological bag as he is. But I think the pragmatic decision.
Inconsistent is a kind description.
Yeah, I'm trying to be diplomatic, but the pragmatic decision for the United States is to make sure that we do have uh, partners in the area that we can work with to
hmm
help further our objectives. And
Yeah.
here, the United States had a considerable amount of money, considerable investment in Plan Colombia, which was a framework that we had for over a decade to fight narco trafficking coming out of Colombia, right? The traffic of drugs coming out of Colombia to the United States, but also to help pacify uh, internal conflict
Yeah.
within Colombia. And so that Colombian military is equipped to the nines by the United States, has received training by the United States, and would be the natural partner if we were able to, or if we were to increase our actions against Venezuela.
And I want to say also that this is an example of, the United States Homeland Security Investigations, which is one of the two divisions of ICE. ICE has two parts: ERO, which is the enforcement and removal operations, which is supposed to be the one that does the enforcement of civil immigration law when they go pick up somebody to detain them for deportation. And then you have Homeland Security Investigations, which does the countering of international, transnational criminal organizations.
Yeah.
They're the ones who build the cases against cartels. They're the ones who also work with partners across the hemisphere who, in training those units, those specialized units, transnational criminal counter criminal units that basically conduct local or national in their own countries based operations to crack down on these criminal organizations. And they've been pulled off and distracted by a lot of the immigration enforcement of non-criminals in the United States. I think the effect of having Homeland Security investigations pulled away to go arrest moms and farmers and waiters in as part of this big dragnet who should be working with those units throughout the hemisphere is also indicative of a bigger problem. So yeah, you can temporarily have the military blowing up ships, but the real investigative work and the behind the scenes work that HSI should be doing shouldn't be distracted by the immigration enforcement piece either.
Yeah, and you take those resources away from our folks, and you really do see, um, implications that affect our security. Um, a lot of what's happening is happening because of the the political or the domestic sources of foreign policy making that I think Donald Trump is so focused on. You see this with what's happening in the Caribbean, and obviously he's speaking to Florida, speaking to Miami, and you see this with the migratory side.
Miami punching above its weight.
Yeah, but they always do.
The
They're
305.
always relevant when it comes to regional politics. I think they've been dominant for
Yeah.
decades, right? But on the immigration side, I think he's speaking to his base, and his base is more important to him in this case than addressing the implications of weakening certain areas of the U.S. government that are dealing with our security in the region.
Yeah, and we'll talk a little bit more about immigration in a few minutes. But first, we want to talk about the other threats to institutions, and specifically freedom of the press, that are playing out right now. I was actually on a podcast with Jorge Ramos just last week that had a very interesting other guest. After we spoke, he spoke to the journalist who was deported to El Salvador simply because he was filming ICE operations. And that was a fascinating conversation where one of the things that emerged is, one, he was here legally. He had papers. He had been in the country for many years. He had worked for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. He had his legal permanent residency. So this is a man who was on track to becoming a citizen and who was a journalist just exercising his First Amendment right to cover what was happening in front of him. And not only was he arrested and detained, he was kept in isolation for 70 days before being deported. And even though there was a judge who had intervened and who had ordered for him to be to be released, instead, ICE placed a detainer, kept him in custody, and they deported him. And he's going to continue to fight that, but now he's having to do it separated from his family and from the community that he's been contributing to for many, many years. So it's a really incredible example of how freedom of the press. This is a man who is now saying that he regrets having reported, when that's exactly the last thing that we should be hearing. Is we should want press to feel that they can conduct and carry out their fourth estate mission of holding public elected officials accountable. And that's what's happening also at CBS right now, as CBS is now being taken over by a new editor-in-chief. Jeremy, fill us in on what Paramount is doing here with Barry Weiss becoming the new editor-in-chief at CBS News.
Right, Barry Weiss. She has a platform, the Free Press, and she created it after leaving the New York Times. She was a New York Times columnist. Before that, she was a Wall Street Journal columnist. And while she was at the Times, she felt the progressive left had really influenced their opinions, and she felt bullied. So she left. She started this platform that would publish contrarian views, not woke. It was very anti-woke. And so recently, her site was purchased by Paramount, CBS News, for $150 million. And they installed her as editor in chief of this. And she's going to be reporting not to the president of CBS News, but to the higher ups, whether it's Larry Ellison or George Cheeks. And it's caused a lot of controversy that people think this is another gift to Donald Trump, which I don't think it is, but maybe a little bit. I think it's always good to have a different voice in an organization. And, the mainstream media, CBS News, I think is a little left. And to balance that, I think it's a good idea. Whether it's her, I'm not sure. But I'm telling you right now, this is about money, because CBS is not done with Trump yet. They paid him off. They had an ombudsman. They did all these things to get through the FCC, right? So Skydance could buy Paramount, CBS. But now it's not over, because Larry Ellison wants to buy Warner Brothers, Warner Discovery, which is also going to need Trump's blessing. So I think they're not done with appeasing Donald Trump. I mean, they're literally ingratiating themselves to him with these tokens. So their next acquisition will go through. And so they're in a hard spot. And unfortunately, CBS News has taken the brunt of it. They're really great people there. They want to report the news.
Do you think that these changes are warranted?
No, I think they were not warranted. I think the Kamala Harris interview was edited like any news story would have been edited. I don't think they need an ombudsman. I mean, this is the house of Edward R. Murrow and Walter Cronkite. The news is solid, so I don't think that was warranted. I don't think they need a Barry Weiss, and I don't think they need a free press. I'm not going to say it's poison. I think it's always good to have a different point of view. And she's not MAGA. She is anti-woke and anti the progressive left influencing news. I don't think any of them were necessary. I think CBS News was fine without all of it, which kind of it makes one suspect that a lot of this is political and trying to appease Donald Trump and the FCC to get their business through. Like the Skydance Paramount merger needed FCC approval. If they buy Warner Brothers Discovery, that's going to need FCC approval. And Donald Trump uses it like a weapon. And so I don't think Carl, I don't think any of it was necessary, which makes you believe these are tokens given to Donald Trump to get business through.
Yeah.
It's a terrible threat to freedom of the press, because if she's answering not to the journalism side, but to the money people who are more interested in putting business above freedom of the press, that itself is concerning, whatever you think of Barry Weiss. And there's certainly like a very good debate to be had about where wokeness overstepped. But there's a lot of great journalists at CBS. So one thing that I think we'll have to keep an eye on in the coming weeks is whether there's an exodus, the way that we've seen from the Washington Post, as it took that rightward tilt under Jeff Bezos' instructions. They've lost a tremendous amount of talent at the Washington Post. If that happens at CBS too, it'll be really telling. So we'll keep an eye on it. The other thing that is going on in this clash of ideals is intensified federal law enforcement in America's cities, particularly blue cities. And the crazy thing, we've talked about this here before, is that the crime rates in plenty of Republican cities, in Republican red states, is much higher than in many of these blue cities. And yet no clash like this is happening in any of those. So the clash of National Guard and federal law enforcement in America's blue cities is very clearly politically motivated. there is not a justification. There's not a justification for any of the type of thing that we're seeing unfold in places like Portland and Chicago. But we're also seeing really aggressive tactics take place. A priest participating in a peaceful protest, and the either ICE, it's hard to tell which federal law enforcement officers are at the top of the building, but either CBP or ICE is most likely, fire a round at this man's head from a smoke bomb. And then after he's hit by that violent round to the head and he tumbles and, turns, he's obviously in pain from it. It's not a deadly round, but it's painful to get hit by a smoke bomb on the head like that, to be fired at with that. Another federal law enforcement officer on the ground pepper sprays him in the face. And the defense that DHS had this week, when pressed on that, was that, oh, well, that's an old video. And you just, so, a lot of emphasis on, they're not even debating it. It's like, oh, well, that's an old video. That doesn't make it right. I think the scenes that are unfolding in America's blue cities are incredibly problematic, because federal law enforcement and the National Guard should not be coming in and escalating tensions in the way they are. And here's the kicker. New data shows that ICE has not actually become more effective. Their big anti-immigrant deportation plan has actually kind of stalled out in recent weeks, even as these aggressive tactics have continued. And again, it's logistically challenging to carry out removals. They're certainly leaving a lot of the criminals untouched, because since they're focused on numbers, they're going after people overwhelmingly with no criminal record. That's what happens when you go to Home Depot and to other places where people are working, not committing crimes, they're working. And so that's the reality of what's happening in America's cities. It's an incredibly dangerous moment. The Chicago mayor and the Illinois governor are very much intensifying their response, and also insisting on standing up for their state. And what you saw was Donald Trump now threatened to have the governor of Illinois arrested. And if we get to that point, Carl, I don't know how you see it, but you've got to believe that there are Republicans who will think it a step too far if a J.B. Pritzker is arrested in this kind of operation. And we've seen it locally. They've done this with a mayor in New Jersey at one point. We saw in Chicago an alderman was aggressively handcuffed for asking for a warrant at a proceeding. And what do you make of this? Are Republicans going to start having more concerns over the Constitution at some point?
Well, to me, it's like, again, we're in a new time. And I think the assumptions that we had about the different parties are being reset. I think the federal law enforcement exists to uphold the law, right, and not override it. And I think the deployment of National Guard troops into Chicago, without the governor's consent, is just unconstitutional. I mean, it's obvious. And we also have Posse Comitatus Act, which bars using the military for domestic policing without congressional approval, or an Insurrection Act invocation. It's all wrong. I mean, they should not be doing that. Those powers are reserved to the states. So having said that, we've seen different actions take place and the use of executive authority, and we've seen the Republican members of Congress stay silent. So when you ask if they reject the use of the military in these different places, what their reaction would be, again, I don't see them rejecting it outwardly. I think you prefaced what you said by talking about blue states or blue cities. I think it's wrong to do that. I think it feeds into a narrative of division that supporters of these acts want.
It's wrong for me to say it, or wrong for the Trump administration to be doing it?
It's wrong for us to think about that. You can say whatever you want, Luis. Don't worry about that. But I'm just saying it's wrong for us to think about it like that. Yes, I know why you're saying it, because these places are being targeted disproportionately. You're right. But I think we should
Both
be,
are not disproportionately only. It's
yeah, but we should
selectively.
be looking at this as an American issue, period. And it should cause outrage on both sides of the aisle, because these things are very clear in the Constitution as being illegal. So, you were asking if why more Republicans aren't outraged by it. I think at this point, the divisions between the parties, the divisions that the president has augmented, um, are pretty much dictating the tenor of the response by the Republican Party.
Well, it's the reason that it's got to be portrayed as blue cities is because that's just the reality. Like I think we're past the point of trying to water this down and try to pretend like this is just an American issue and we need to have like a more academic conversation. We've got to call it what it
You
is.
know what? I'm not
And
saying that this is academic. I'm saying that if we assume and if we start to speak in terms of blue states versus red states, we're really on our way to the kind of division um,
but
that
Carl,
I
that's
don't
where
think
we
we want.
are. Carl,
No,
and look, the idea of this podcast, we called it centered,
I don't think
centered
that's
in
where we
part
are.
because the idea was that we would call bullshit on both sides. And I
Right.
think we've done that in some cases. And by the way, we're going to wrap this show in part talking about a victory for the Trump administration, which is the ceasefire deal in Gaza. We're going to give them all the credit there. So,
Sure.
um, credit where credit is due. But the reality is that the threats to our institutions and the march to authoritarianism are
Yes.
so egregious at this point that to try to water that down into a more nuanced conversation that leaves out red and blue is to disregard the reality of what's happening in the ground, which is that a Republican administration, which it's hard to even call it Republican at this point. I think it's gone well beyond that, but an administration and a president and his goons in places like the Department of Justice, where we saw with Pam Bondi, the way she behaved in front of those senators, they are entirely disregarding the norms and the traditional practices of our government, and they are going after cities and elected officials and people in blue states for entirely selective reasonings. The prosecution of Jim Comey, I'm no Jim Comey fan. I think he's a terrible person who, he knew he was putting his thumb on the scale to undermine Hillary Clinton's campaign in 2016. So I'm no fan of Jim Comey, but it's a selective prosecution that is entirely politically motivated. And if you look at what's happening with these cities, it is entirely selective. They're not going after cities in red states that have very, very high crimes levels, much more so than New York or Chicago or certainly Washington D.C. They're going after blue states because they are blue states and blue cities.
Luis, my viewpoint is that the more you localize this argument, the more you make this a partisan argument, the worse it is for us as Americans, because at the end of the day, this is not a blue state issue. This is an American issue.
Well,
Not
that's a
using,
good point.
let me finish, not using the US Constitution across the board as the standard for red and blue states is a mistake. And what I believe is that the purpose of this conversation, as we like to talk about it in a centrist view, right, is to call bullshit. Of course, the same bullshit that you see on the left that I will call, and I will call the bullshit on the right too. The bullshit on the left, though, in my perspective, in my view, is that we need to make sure that the Constitution and the beliefs and the guardrails are issued equally. And if we can't do that, then why are we trying to have a country in the first place? That's the
Yeah, but
conversation that
that's
I
what's not
think.
happening right
But
now,
that's
and
but
and
we
we have
have
to
to hold
recognize
them
it.
to that. Do we want a country or not? We want a
Yeah.
country. Do we want
And
to
where
be
I
in a
agree
place?
with you
Yeah.
is that we have a need to elevate that, but look where the conversation's going. Tucker Carlson posted a pretty egregious video, um, where he's got a point about one thing, which is that some protesters do occasionally throw rocks and act against federal officials, and that needs to stop. Anyone who's throwing rocks or throwing, orange cones or whatever needs to be held. Of
Yeah.
course, Tucker portrays it as if they are conducting some kind of coordinated military assault against folks, which is not what's happening. The vast majority of protests are peaceful. The priest who got shot in the head with that smoke round was not doing anything to warrant that kind of hit. Like, let me also say that, like, violence in any way is never the answer. But Tucker Carlson's video is essentially suggesting that we're heading to a racial civil war and
Right.
saying that the elites of this country brought in migrants claiming that they were just here as like fleeing or looking for economic opportunity, and that they're essentially an army, and really, making it an ugly claim. So we've got to push back on that too.
Yeah, but the question that I would issue, even though I think what Tucker Carlson is doing is quite extreme, the question that I would pose is, why do people feel that way? And one of the issues that I think we need to do is re-examine Me Too. We need to re-examine wokeness. We need to re-examine the attitudes and views that have popped up during the last couple of decades. Not saying that a lot of that was warranted, Luis,
Or was
but
not
to the
warranted.
extent what was warranted. A lot of the treatment that women were getting was wrong. A lot of the treatment that a lot of folks that weren't allowed to participate in US society was wrong. But the issue also has to do with the use of identity as sort of your prime mover, which now a lot of white people find useful to use their identity as the prime mover as well, because of the problems that they have or why they're disgruntled. So
Yeah, but Carl,
when we talk
I
about what's
appreciate where you're
happening in the
going with this,
country, wait,
but let's
when you're
call it what it
talking
is.
about this country, when you're talking about this country, you will never be able to get out of the issues of identity. And the issues of identity work with blacks and whites and women and trans all together. And there's an aspect of this that we need to really go back to and ask, why are we in the situation that we're in now? People feel that they're losing their status in this country. And I'm talking about white people.
White people feel they're losing their status,
Right.
but I think we have to be careful. And again, because we've been talking about our former guests and the incredible points that they've made. Cornell made a really important point about the fact that young people are feeling that Democrats are unresponsive, or that they're mistaken when they basically try to treat all of the issues that they care about as a distraction. It is not a distraction to want to end discrimination, Carl. With all due
It is not.
respect,
It is not. It is
you
not a distraction to
you
want to talk about discrimination, but to ignore that there's going to be a backlash or a response from people that feel that they're going to lose their status in a reality in a country is naive. And the way that we can get to this is what should be discussed. It's the management of these freedoms that now everyone should be entitled to, in a way that doesn't make that doesn't make other people feel like they're missing out. The issue of affirmative action, for instance, is one that comes to mind, right? Affirmative action is there. Nixon is the one that pushes it through, right? And it focuses on blacks having the same opportunities at jobs, at universities, etc. There's a lot of white people, poor white people, that felt that they were being excluded as a result. That's reality.
Yeah,
So that's
and
what we're
maybe we
dealing
did a
with
piss
now.
poor job of explaining that they were already included in the first place. This was
That's
never
not
a
how they
problem of
feel.
white people having opportunities. It
That's
was
not how they
about
feel.
everybody else not having them.
They've never felt that way. They've never felt that they were included. Talk to people in West Virginia, talk to people in Oklahoma. They feel like they are let out, and they're giving an opportunity to black people and brown people that and it's not merit based is how they look at it. And they ignore all the injustices that have happened to these folks, because injustices have happened to white poor people in this country. That's how
Sure.
they look at it.
Yeah.
So we have to come to terms with the fact that people feel excluded, and that the
Jeremy,
solution going forward might not be identitarian, might be economic.
Well, I actually agree with everything Carl said, and I was a supporter of affirmative action, and a lot of my friends thought the same way that Carl is telling, white people in West Virginia. They feel like, wait a minute, why should they have that opportunity when I don't? And I'm from a rural, poor community. I don't have that chance because I'm not black or brown. So yeah, I do think I think affirmative action was really important. And I do think people have been felt left out of the conversation. I'm a gay man, and I have to tell you, I've sometimes felt out of the conversation. Uh, so it's important. And will we ever get to the point where everybody has the same opportunity? Because affirmative action might kind of be on the way out, but it's still needed. And there's still going to be people, if you work in an office and there's a black or brown person, there's going to be, the sentiment of they're here for affirmative action. They didn't earn it. They're not here on their merits. And I think that's bad.
It's bad that people feel that way. It's also bad that people don't recognize that it's still needed in some degree, because for those of us who don't look a certain way, that is the first barrier. Whether you're getting pulled over by a cop, or whether you are looking for that promotion and wondering why young, less experienced are getting certain promotions, that's still a reality. That's still a reality. So I don't disagree with you guys that plenty of people feel left out. I don't think it's enough to pretend like we can move past and like everybody's included already, because we're not. And this isn't just a backlash. This is a direct and aggressive attempt by the current administration to push minorities out. Like, if you look at the firings, so the reductions in force that the federal government has carried out, a large number of those, a large percentage, has been minorities. It's an attempt to remove minorities from the federal government, to remove them from places where they may have more economic opportunity, and to go after academic institutions to keep them from giving them the education that makes them competitive. That's just the reality.
But a lot of these folks will say the following to you, Luis, even though that may end up being the reality. They'll say that you had your opportunity, and they'll use the 60s as the reference point for the beginning of when you were given that opportunity up until
Hard
now.
to tell me to pull myself up by my bootstraps if I don't have boots.
Yeah,
on that note,
I think that's where we are right now. And I think that if we can't find what draws us, what keeps us together as Americans, right? The things that make you different than other countries, and there's so many. If we can't focus on those commonalities, we're really in trouble. And we're not there yet. I don't think we're in the big trouble yet. But
I think we're getting there. I'm extremely concerned about the developments that have played out over the last few weeks, especially. There's been an intensification of it, and I am deeply concerned for the health of our democracy. This is not going to be an election that can be won just at the margins. There's going to need to be massive turnout in 2026 to overcome the shenanigans that are sure to come our way. And there's going to need to be good, smart, well-meaning Republican voters who look at the situation and say, this is not who we are as Americans. And that's where I think the left needs to also operate, which is, we can't treat our basis concerns as distractions, but we're going to need good people who are Republicans to help us really mobilize the kind of wave that makes the shenanigans that this administration is trying to carry out in 2026 and beyond from taking hold.
But you got to give them something to vote for. And it can't be, oh, vote for me because I'm a Democrat. Oh, vote for me because I'm a black guy. Oh, vote for me because I'm a woman. It can't be that. It's got to be, you are the better alternative for my self-interest.
Look, I don't think Kamala ever said she was, made it a big deal that she was a woman or a woman of color. That was not the focus of her campaign. So I appreciate, Carl, that you're thinking in ideals. We're not there.
No, I'm thinking as a regular American, and we are not there. We are regular Americans, and they need to understand your experience, Luis, just like they need to understand mine, but we also need to understand theirs. And there isn't enough of understanding theirs.
Turning now to an important final note here. It is we did talk about that we're going to give credit where credit is due. And the Trump administration has achieved something pretty significant here in a Gaza ceasefire deal that it looks like has the potential to work because all of the parties seem to want it to work. And if they didn't, I think that the Trump administration has finally kind of been able to put Benjamin Netanyahu on notice that he needs to play ball or he's going to suffer the consequences. That, I think, is what's making the difference here, as well as an effort to work with allies, including Qatar, to try to get to a different place. It's commendable.
Oh yeah, I mean, you got to give credit where credit's due. If this Israel Hamas deal holds, this will be groundbreaking in a huge way. And we've been at this for decades, and you're starting to get reports of reactions, even in even in Gaza and in different places, of support and hope. And again, you may not agree with Donald Trump on a series of issues, but if he's able to usher a peace agreement through, man, chapeau. He gets hats off to Donald Trump. The world could use more peace now, especially.
I'm not ready to nominate him for a Nobel Peace Prize, or as his staff likes to call it, the Nobel Peace Prize.
And I'm starting to see reports that Norway is on edge over Trump ahead of Nobel Peace Prize verdict, because they feel like if they don't give him the prize, that there will be political fallout.
They're the next annexation.
Yeah. Well, I don't know about that, but people are scared.
Greenland and Norway, throw them both in.
Yeah. I don't know.
Yeah. Jeremy, any final thoughts on your end?
No, I'm not going anywhere near that one. All right.
All right. Well, thank you guys. I appreciate the great conversation today, as usual.
Absolutely.
We'll be back with some fun guests next week. You'll want to tune in. And thank you for hitting that subscribe button. And thank you to Jeremy and Carl, as usual.
All right.
Our panel featured Louis Miranda, former Obama White House communications advisor and former spokesperson at DHS, Carl Meacham, former Clinton appointee and a former senior Republican staff on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and Jeremy Murphy, former CBS executive, author, and publicist.